our gospel, Jesus is pleased with the widow. And that's good news for those who might not have much in a worldly sense, or those who are struggling to get by. To those of us who are better off, it invites honest reflection, but should not be a discouragement. Jesus, God, was pleased with the widow. Jesus, God, can also take pleasure in us. After all, we are his children through baptism. God can take pleasure in us. As we see in the gospel, it's not how much we're able to give, but the intention, the goodwill with which we bring our gifts to God. Do we have a generous heart? Do we have an open heart? Do we give willingly, or do we give grudgingly? Or do we hold back in the time that we share with our church or with the people who are important to us? Or are we generous with that? And with the material means that God has blessed us, do we recognize it as his gift and, give it to his uses? Or do we try to keep it for ourselves, or always be thinking on, what can this do for me? That God can take pleasure in us. What was most remarkable about the widow, Jesus said she gave her whole livelihood. And so what's remarkable about the widow is her trust in God's providence. It was her whole livelihood, which means that she trusted that God would provide for her needs. That it was an act of faith as well as an act of love and devotion toward God. The same was true of the widow of Zarephath in our first reading. She trusted in God. She had only enough food to make one more meal for her and her son, and yet even with that, she first made the cake for the prophet, trusting that God would be true to his word. Interesting enough that this confidence in God is also what Jesus asked of us through St. Faustina. He said that his divine mercy is like a fountain that has no limit, but the size of the vessel with which we draw is our trust in him. God is pleased with those who put their trust in him, whether we're in good circumstances or in difficult circumstances, to turn our eyes toward him. The woman in today's gospel was lacking in material resources, but she was rich in heavenly ones. You should not be discouraged if you are not lacking, or if you are well off. But the Lord's observation does challenge us to be generous. In another place, Jesus says, where your heart is, there also your treasure will be. And so if our treasure is in things of this world, then it indicates that our heart is also with things of this world. When he asks us, he invites us to put our trust in him. Also, the contrast between the widow and the others, it teaches us about the virtue of magnanimity or great-souledness. In some ways it is similar to generosity, but magnanimity, this greatness of soul, it's this idea that, we step up when the need is set before us, rather than backing down. The opposite of it would be pusillanimity, where this weak-souledness, where we shy away from the act of love or the good thing that needs to be done. But above all today, when we see this gospel, the widow only gave 2 small coins, and yet it was pleasing to God because she gave it with confidence, she gave it with trust, she gave it with love, as a true daughter of God. And whether we're blessed with much or with little, God invites us to make the same offering to him with a generosity of spirit, to acknowledge that God will see us through our present difficulties, to trust in him, and to make an offering in sincerity of heart to our God.